And welcome to the Crash Chords Podcast!
Wow.
That died. It died.
It died.
It kind of died off. It's like Podcast!
No, it faded into awesomeness. It tipped over into another dimension.
I'll
Don't
take
be so
faded into
negative.
awesomeness. Wow, you're being the positive
Faded.
one?
Faded into awesomeness. That sounds like you were once something even more awesome than awesome.
Or the best metal name ever. Faded into awesomeness is totally a metal band name.
That's right. See, again,
but it's the lighter
they
side.
would have
It's
an
like
ego.
You couldn't do death metal.
No, it'd be like Euro metal.
Like light Euro metal.
Yeah.
Maybe
Light
even
Euro.
industrial.
Him was light Euro metal, wasn't it?
Sort of.
Either way, though, metal in general has the ego that I would expect them to fade
Into
to something
awesomeness.
as you know, measly as awesome.
Yeah, right. It's
What's
so
that?
meek and measly.
What is that?
I have it. Butchered awesome death.
So moving on,
are hard
over the
names.
weekend I did sound for Raw Burlesque again. I've been working with them the last couple of months. Future guests Danger Doll and Stella Chu are the co-producers of it, who will hopefully be coming on. But before that show, I went to Kitty Nights, which is a weekly every Sunday burlesque show. This one happened to be hosted by a friend of one of the hosts, and hopefully soon friend of the show, Schaefer the Dark Lord, who listens. Hello, Mr. Dark Lord. He was hosting, and he performed his two new songs, Roar and Don't. Roar, which is where he samples Roar by Katy Perry, and then Don't, which is the college...
Is there a zip file pun in there, by any chance?
Is it R?
No,
R or
not Roar.
Okay.
That would
And
be
then the
called
second
dot
song...
You had to process that, didn't you?
The second song on that two-track single that he released was Don't, which I played for you guys, which was that college classroom parody featuring Charles Stunning, who is our guest next month with her bandmate in Afterbirth Monkey. The cool thing about the live performance is he had a little spiel at the beginning, and he was holding a handful of papers for a fill in the song where when he's yelling at the class, there's the sound of throwing papers. So he actually threw papers live. I kept one. I put a picture of it on Facebook. It's actually a syllabus breakdown, and the base explanation of the course is the lyrics.
That's cool.
And
That's really good.
And at the top, it's got like his name, his email address, and like his contact info. And then on the bottom, it says downloads, like for the course, and it's the download link to the actual two songs because they're free. And I thought it was really clever, actually.
That is. Some bands throw their underwear.
He throws syllabuses.
It's less,
Syllabi.
It's less Mr. Dark Lord and more Professor Dark Lord now.
It is actually Professor Dark Lord. He graduated.
Oh, okay.
He's no longer a...
With honors.
Is he a TA now?
No, he's a professor.
Oh, legit.
He went from Mr. to Professor. You're a Mr. as a TA.
Yeah.
And then you're a Professor.
Yeah.
Right.
He's not Dr. Dark Lord yet. We haven't gotten there.
Oh.
Well,
that's a shame.
doctorates are so time-consuming. Like, do you really need one?
No, I think what was it? When did Sheldon on Big Bang Theory? When did he get his doctorate? Like 8 years old or something like that?
Yeah, seriously. You're beyond that at that point.
Leonard, I think it was more like 24. But
I don't remember.
you know, and Howard's the only one who doesn't have one. I read all this yesterday. I really had nothing to do.
Apparently. But yeah, so I got to see him perform the two new songs live, which was great. I chatted with him a bit. The newest episode of his podcast, the Epic Podcast, they did a War of the Worlds spoof, which was fun. Like, they had their regular podcast, and then it would get interrupted by clips of War of the Worlds-esque stuff, culminating in the world being destroyed.
Classic, he's talking about the classic
Radio play.
British rendition where
Oh,
people
okay.
actually thought
That's
there
The
was
radio play.
alien invasion.
a lot more interesting.
because they
Yes.
didn't actually explain
That's
this
the-
is a reading of a book.
That's the only one I count as existing. I pretend the movie didn't happen.
Which one?
All of them.
There
That's
was a
something that-
1950s one, but yeah,
But
it was not that good.
I meant the Orson Welles original War of the Worlds. They spoofed that and did it quite well. Also, there's future collaborations with Epic Podcast in the near future, which we discussed a bit as well. But it was good to see him perform again and perform his new songs. Besides that, the weekend wasn't that much more eventful for me. Musically, anyway. We'll get into some other stuff later.
You got a couple minutes worth of that.
I did.
That was,
That's pretty.
Oh, actually, there was a burlesque performer who rapped while stripping, and
That's
she
hard.
rapped a parody. She rapped "Get Your Freak On," but instead it was called "Put Your Dick On," and she was wearing a strap on at the end.
That sends mixed messages.
It was actually kind of an awesome performance.
I mean, well, like
her name
most
was
stripping. I assumed that every article of clothing was breakaway because if you're trying to take your shirt off, and
she actually
you have
rapped.
to speak through your shirt.
She actually rapped through the bulk of the song, and she was only wearing a trench coat, pasties, and the strap on. So it wasn't a huge ordeal on dress. Her name was Nikki Knickers.
Well, if anyone's curious, then they have the name.
So you can look it up. I don't know if she has an online presence yet, because she was debuting that night.
Anyway, I guess that let's just go to John. Our album of the week is his pick.
As I was explaining last week, this week's choice was something that I just saw popping up left, right, and center when I was looking for an electronica album, because I was at my wit's end. I was looking in indie, I was looking in alt rock, I was looking in regular rock, I was looking in prog. I couldn't find anything that was really jumping out to me, so I made a bet to Steve a while back that I would find not just a great, but an epic techno album. Well, I didn't find that, but I found something pretty darn good. Love, Death, and Immortality, the sophomore album of the Glitch Mob. It is a combination of electronica, glitch, which is a specific field of techno where you tend to sample computer noises, scratching, skipping, a lot of reverb, and a lot of the instruments that you would hear from, like, say, MIDI files. And this actually is a really much a dance album. That's what it is first and foremost, but a techno dance album. And yeah, that's how I got this one, and I was very happy for finding it that way.
Wow, that was like at the same time.
I love how both people have both of you.
Well, no, I was just
we're both about to attack John for something, I'm sure.
No, actually, I was about to mention that when we had Hops on episode
77.
He mentioned Glitch Mob as someone he listened to.
That's right, because we were discussing.
That's where it actually
Vapor
started
City.
me finding all this stuff about Glitch.
The album was Vapor City by Machine Drum. And
Yeah.
I have a feeling that fell under Glitch Hop. Come to think of it.
So I remember hearing the name through him.
Well, we've come across a variety of electronic music, and it's always interesting when we get into this discussion because electronica is at the top of it. That's the umbrella category for which all these other things fall. Because, of course, anything can be electronic. You can go back to the 50s and find, like, early electronica music. But then, beyond that, it's really just what you want to listen to it for.
Yeah.
Do you want to dance to it? Do you want to just zone out to the complexity that is possible by a computer that obviously isn't possible by humans? And I think this really leans more toward the dancing side of that spectrum. Because, on one hand, John's goal here, I think, was to find something that was highly technical. And though this does have technical moments, it needs to be constrained within human comprehension. And not just human comprehension, but human comprehension on the dance floor. What your feet are actually able to do. Which means still, in the end, fairly steady beats.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Although, I've seen different types of dancing that would indicate that dancing has evolved past a basic rirhythm anyway.
Well, people would even argue that, going back to ballet, it was more complicated back then than for sure what most people are doing to trance, which is just fist pumping. But the thing is that one of those things that I think you're thinking of is, of course, IDM, intelligent dance music, which implies there's going to be a lot more going on there. So probably not to be played on the layman's dance floor or on the dance floor of a Sweet 16. But even so, this was supposed to fall under the category of IDM. You found that in several places.
Not
right,
IDM,
John?
EDM.
Oh, EDM.
I misspoke that.
Okay, so it is not labeled IDM anywhere.
No, EDM, electric dance music.
All right, that changes things a little bit.
Okay.
You drop the I away, it's not intelligent anymore.
Well, the
I'm
whole
not
thing-
saying this is not intelligent. I just think that
Is
it's more
there-
accessible. It's more accessible
Than
than
IDM?
than it lets on, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I also want to ask, is there an SDM? Is there stupid dance music?
Actually, that's one of the biggest discussions about the naming of IDM. IDM, intelligence dance music. Everybody hates it. Hates the name. The people who make that music, the fans, the people who hate that music. Everybody is kind of upset at that name. Because it
Yeah, that makes
implies that other music is stupid. Most of the
Yeah,
people who
that's
make it
true.
are just... And only like the real diehard fans and the diehard critics are the ones that keep referring to it as IDM.
Yeah, there's a pretentiousness there that I
Yeah.
don't think is very appealing to most people. And by the way, Matt, no, there is no SDM because it would often be confused with BDSM. So
Which is a whole different category.
Yeah.
Why don't we actually get
probably a
into the
musical
record, which
category,
I don't
too.
think that John actually mentioned the name of, which is The Glitch Mob is the band.
That's what I know. I said Love, Death, Immortality
We
by
were
the
getting
Glitch Mob.
there.
The sophomore album. I even remember what I said for once.
Oh, I didn't, but I never do.
As we were saying, this
Playback
is their
will
second.
tell.
This
Yes.
is their second album, and it starts with "Mind of the Beast."
So this was a high energy intro track. It had all of the tropes and things you would expect from a trance song.
No, it did not have all the tropes. I don't like the no. I'm refuting that right away. Yes, frantic intro, but did introduce a lot of things you don't find in standard trance songs.
I'm gonna say
Piano work
first off, he's
is a
right in
big
one
thing.
area. That's instrumentation. Instrumentation-wise, yes, this separates itself a little
Okay.
bit. I started to think about this track as a sort of unholy child of all, because in a way, it is trance music. You can hear that at least in its presentation, in the framework, the form of this track is definitely trance. But then, yeah, when you start to listen to the instrumentation here and there, it actually borrows quite a bit from metal, or the kind that you would find, in like the arena rock back in like the 80s. At least that tone about it. Certain things, like the very heavy reverb on the synthstrument that is made to sound somewhat like a guitar.
and the expose of some of the instrumentation, the way some of you get not solos but like mini solos, mini exposés of what the actual tone this instrument is doing.
Yeah, little things here and there, but at the same time, I'm somewhat between this because I have to say instrumentation alone does not really take away. It depends on how you're going into it. The first thing that I was able to hone in on really was the form of the track, and that means very steady beats, slow, dramatic volume swells, these fairly simplistic but really loudly stated high register melodies, and that's common in a lot of trance. That sort of screeching higher up melody that almost cuts through you like a knife, but at the same time it's something to fist pump to. These are all elements of trance. The fact that there is a piano there, the fact that there is a few other elements, a very deep grumbling bass toward the end, that's not so common in trance.
Another heavy guttural percussion breakdown around about the 220 minute mark.
That's right.
A real guttural piece that you actually hear more towards the leanings of those metal or industrial ideas.
That's actually the bass I was talking about, right around the 220 mark. It was
Okay.
sort of a B section for this. It sounded like a big die down, but then at the same time, I can't quite call it slow down because of course the beat is not changing here, but it's certainly a breather for this track because most of it is just loud, loud, loud. But again, that's common for trance too. They always have to take that breather where they have to pull back and then slowly build up again.
Okay, so I wouldn't say it was all trance tropes, but they were there. They were there in this song. But it did have something about it that did
I'm
keep
proving
it
your
engaging.
point, actually. I'm proving that in the end it really is trance, I think.
It had trance tropes for sure, which is what I was saying. Even if the whole song wasn't specifically trance, those things were there. But it also had an engaging quality to it, the fact that when it did come back to the high energy did pull you in. I mean, if you wanted to be. If you were resistant, that's one thing. But there was that energy to get consumed in if you wanted to accept it and go with it.
If you just weren't having the fist pumping, then it wouldn't ensnare you, I guess is what you're saying.
Well,
Yes.
and that whole engaging aspect, which I think is one of the biggest draws for this album as a whole for me, is the use of things like piano tones, guitar tones, bass tones that are deviant from your standard
we
trance.
get some of this later. I feel like it's not really here as far as an intro goes. I think it's more along the lines of the metal-inspired things, and that is definitely...
Well, no, it's those little aspects. It's the deviation from the trance that really does make it much more engaging to me than your standard fare.
Right. Tonal variances, but not form variances.
Correct. Which is more or less what I was saying, is that the form was very similar to stuff I had heard before, even though the tonal differences did stand out, especially in very specific moments.
All right, well, let's look at a couple of other things here. Later in track 2, we get Our Demons, featuring Aja Volkman.
It's AJA and then Volkman. So, pronounce it as you will.
I was not doubting
Miss
the Volkman.
Yeah. She's actually the vocal aspect of this track, and just to let you know, every even track has a female vocalist singing on it. Every odd track doesn't. It's a weird composition.
The oddest thing to note.
Yeah, but it's true. He's
Every
right.
other song is featuring her, and she actually does come back.
Interesting.
This is also a bit of a departure from what I personally like about trance, or techno, or electronic in general. I don't really like vocals in my wub-wubs. I don't. To put it simply.
I just find that the most hilarious observation. Because most people obviously are not going to wub-wubs for vocals. But then again, most people dislike wub-wubs because it lacks vocals, and here you are coming along to say that you don't like vocals in your wub-wubs. It's this very odd circular logic.
And the whole reason is because of the way vocals are used in electronic music tends to be as just a short little burst line thrown in randomly in the song at a culmination of a build-up, or at the culmination of a breakdown, something like that. Here it's being used a little bit differently.
Yes.
And that's where I really do enjoy it.
So yeah, this song I have quite a bit to say about, because, I mean, well, a lot to say and not a lot to say at the same time, I guess. So the thing about this song is it starts in a very kind of cliche, almost 2000s metal kind of way, almost industrial.
Fast, high, deep, low.
Yeah, but it's abrasive. And then so is the singing. When it comes in, the singer, she is very abrasive in her style, very reminiscent of Amy Lee, but more so abrasive than Amy Lee. And I think what really got me about this song is in style and in sound and in rhythm. It very much reminded me of that early to mid 2000s industrial metal, new metal sound.
I heard the same thing, and I thought, believe it or not, that it could have actually used some Evanescence, and I don't say that often.
I don't think. Well, actually, I would change that to "you don't say that ever."
Yeah.
Until now.
Yes.
But
this
that was kind of implied.
But I had said very early on when talking to Steve that his complaints with this track, I don't argue one bit. However, I still ate it up like candy. I just, for whatever, it hit that nostalgic note that really pulled me in and really made me like this song. Even the name of the song, "Our Demons," is very much an Evanescence-ish style sounding song.
Well, let's talk about, position here. Like, on the chronology, yes, this is that early 2000s sound. I don't think that's really lost on anybody, because it was pervasive at the time, and kind of spearheaded by Evanescence. People hear it, and they either go one way or the other with it. In my experience, because of how dated it's starting to sound, people usually tend to go the other way. But, of course, if that was your thing back then sure, it's going to carry a lot of nostalgia, because we don't really get it too much. It's not like it's the kind of thing that people are really hammering down these days.
Well,
I think
most of those
it did die.
Well, it did, because most of those bands evolved past it. Bands like Disturbed and System of a Down.
Right.
They all went somewhere else eventually.
Right, but here's my argument with this particular track. I feel in many ways that there was more to garner from Evanescence back then than there was from this track. I feel like, in a sense, one of the reasons why people loved Evanescence back then is because it had that dark tonality. It had that grit that seemed to, be the understandable follow-up to an industrial 90s style. So here along comes Evanescence, and people start throwing words at them like emo and all that stuff. I feel like, you know what, as much as it was made fun of at times, there was something there. It did have a dark quality to it, and you know what, as long as you stick with an emotion and you go with it, then more power to you. This felt like it was trying to go the dark route. It had some potential for darkness, but it was unrealized, especially considering the title, as you pointed out, is called Our Demons. I feel like it just wasn't getting there.
Well,
because that abrasiveness doesn't quite lend to that for me. It feels like the abrasiveness was taking away from the dark side and going in more of just a cliched trance side, yet again.
Actually, I'm gonna argue that a little, and I think it was really what really did this for me. This track was the overuse, like the real pushing the boundaries of electronica-ing or auto-tuning her vocals, and then using that that synth chime work, that synth real hi-hat type of a work to rehumanize it. I love that duality that was going on there between the two. It did a great job of really expanding upon her notes that really, when coupled with those real slow percussions on the low end, I loved.
No, I actually think I know the moment you're talking about, and I did like that moment. It was more of a breakdown, kind of a slowdown, around like the 350 mark. It gave the illusion of this slowdown, which again I kind of noted in the previous track, which tend to be the moments I like better here, because I'm not as oriented with the whole abrasive side of things. I find it I find it loud, I find it overbearing a lot of the times. I feel like some breathing is needed in a few of these tracks, so when it does slow down, it seems to find itself. It seems to find the soul that was hiding behind all this fluff otherwise.
I mean, I will agree with Steve on the fact that even though I did enjoy the track, it definitely didn't feel as much as Our Demons would, the title had dictated, that kind of inner brooding. It just, there was a lot of fluff within it. There was potential for the inner brooding, but not the chorus vocals, because the chorus vocals had the brooding nature, but the chorus sound, the melody chorus that was instrumental,
It was a little too high.
yeah, it didn't have that brooding feel, and I felt that's where it kind of fell short.
Well,
I liked the song.
I didn't want brooding from this song, though.
Yeah, see, that's
the
what-
tempo alone.
All
really
what we were
just-
looking for.
I didn't want that. I didn't need that. I wasn't
just-
expecting that.
And then again, it's not fair to fault it so harshly based on a title alone. There are plenty of songs we've liked that
Well,
didn't match
no, I
their
mean the title
titles.
was more of an afterthought. It was the fact that the presentation of darkness when it was there offered me something. It
Right.
offered me something new for this album, and I felt like that was when it was at its best.
That's a fair assessment.
But here, I will agree with a few things, because we're just focusing on this one thing, trying to figure out where we're placing it and what we want out of it. But there are some musical elements that I did like here. I realized, whether it's EDM or IDM or whatever, it's not so much about changing the rhythm of things, which really would throw any dancer off, so much as it's about changing the accents. And this occurs in varying places throughout this, and it is also another element that I liked. For instance, when they're changing up the drums toward the ends of phrases here and there, they tend to get a little improvised. You know, they tend to have these little flurries here now and then.
Expansive. They're
Yeah.
playing.
Yeah, and we get a little bit more of that later.
And okay, Skull Club, track 3, had something a little bit different. Once again, we're talking about these differences from your standard electronica. Harpsichord, or harpsichord-ish kind of
It
an
was
introduction.
more harpsichord-ish. It was like a harpsichord, because it wasn't actually a harpsichord. It was a electronic instrument representing a harpsichord.
Well, getting more interesting still, this was a pretty an interesting exposition because of the fact that piano is something I feel like we really haven't had much. I feel like the piano was kind of hiding. Maybe it was there in the first track.
It
but
was,
again,
but it was
was.
definitely buried amongst other stuff.
Exactly. This is something, when they offer new tones, I'm interested. And you're right, it did kind of have the resonance of a harpsichord. Probably because of the phasing that was on it. It sort of gave it this tinniness.
Well, it also,
it's still a piano.
It also had
Yeah.
something I noticed, and this was throughout a great accenting triple beat in the background. That was
This is in the intro?
This was in the intro, and this was throughout the parts where the synth harpsichord keeps coming back. It's an accent that really helps you to define the differences from section to section, from frame to frame, of what they're creating with this tone. That really did keep it interesting for me.
Yeah, but there is one thing. This had one of the most cheesy build-ups I felt on the entire album.
We are.
The biggest problem with the build-up on this album, on this track rather, there were moments in the album too, but this track is it had a very cheesy robotic voice that's cliche. It's very apropos of Daft Punk and other Sandstorm and Zombie Nation and you name it.
Kencraft, all that stuff.
I was naming songs, you were naming bands. Thank you. But the thing is, though, is as cheesy as the build was, once it powered through into the explosion that followed, it was actually very interesting. There was the greatness that came after the build was a lot more unique and had a lot more to offer.
This is the first time where I was actually engaged by something that I'm sure the band was going for. Because they tend to, they're focusing really on the higher energy stuff here. They wanted high energy here, and that's what I got. That's what I got out of it. I was actually intrigued instead of eye-rolling. Because the fact is, earlier moments, these build-ups, and then sometimes the climax, it's just like, fist pump your way into eternity, and that's not always good. But if you follow through, it can be really, really good. I mean, the build-up itself may be cheesy, but then finally once you hit that mark, I think that's where they finally hit it.
That's where they really created sort of a duality in the song itself. It became a A-B kind of composition in this track, and I see it as more of an industrial techno versus a cyber techno, just in the way the tones are set. They are related, and there is connections in the melodies and everything like that, but there is a duality going on here. And it was in those B sections, right after those tropey build-ups, that you really get the heavy glitch influence in it, especially in the vocals. And that's something I really, really was enjoying. Little phrase work that was just halting and shattered on the edges that really give it a very airy, cyberpunkish feel.
I mean, I would agree with the cyberpunk feel, but the industrial stuff, I got more of a sense in the next track when we get to it. In this one, I mean, I can see the cyberpunk to a point, but it still very much felt more close to trance and
yeah.
No, that's what I'm getting at.
Trance, I feel like a lot of the problem with this record is I keep falling back on, well, that's typical trance. If you do something different with it, then you have something different, and obviously that's going to be better no matter what. Let's talk about how they're doing this instead of what they're doing.
And that is by changing the percussion instrument.
It's not just that, but it's also the tone here. Again, the second you escape that cheesy build-up and you hit that mark, it's the tone that most intrigued me. And it's strange, because there's still some clichéness to this tone, but it sounded... The primary trance riff sort of consisted of these almost satisfying tearing sounds, or more like that of a high-performance engine, or like a race car, or a motorcycle. And that's what I feel like there is some clichéness in that, because to invoke motors and engines kind of invokes a personality that I know too well, being a Staten Islander. Like, trance and V8s go hand in hand somehow. Either way, culturally that's proven true. But I'll admit, on some level, it's kind of badass. And I think that's the tone that I really, really got out of this main section here. Because that's not so present on the rest of this album. Usually, they're from a melodic perspective, they're more focused on the high end. That high-end, typical trance instrument that I discussed earlier, that's been here in the previous two tracks, and it dominates the melody almost throughout this entire album. Here, we get something with a little bit more oomph to it, it seems.
Substance.
Well, substance is irrelevant when you're talking about just one sound.
That's true.
I'm not talking about the whole entire form of this track. I mean, I think John's pretty on the mark when he talks about the A-B. It just kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah.
And then once you return to A, it's just as impactful as it was the first time you got it.
And it actually wasn't just a regular A, too. The revisits that we go through here, the deep end, the dark end, the percussion end really undergoes some pretty interesting changes. And that's something I'm really liking about the album as a whole. I like what they're doing with the, quote, bass and drum range. The lower register, the deeper registers really are different from song to song, and in the track themselves mutate. They change up and they keep it fresh, and that's one of the things that has always drawn me to electronic music, is that lower register? Is that percussive register? And
you mean how complex it is, or how complex it can get, potentially?
Yes.
Or just the tone of it?
All three. In this case, it does undergo some real tonal shifts, but the complexity changes. It becomes sweeter, it becomes softer, and it goes into like a real frantic pieces. I love how they're able to play with it, yet still keep a very steady tempo.
I think it's that franticness that also drew me to this. Because once all said and done, and maybe I'll retract that. Maybe it is substance in the end. Because once you fall back on these drum bits, it gives you something else to focus on. It's sort of an expanse of what I said in the previous track, where you have these drum lines that are fairly straightforward when they start. The phrases in the beginning are a lot more straightforward than how they end. When you get to the ends of these phrases, the drum machine kind of goes on steroids, and it allows you to play around with those accent marks again. When it's jerking around the accent marks, then all of a sudden it almost seems like it's falling out of tempo, even though it's really not. That's when I think their beat work is at their most interesting. It's usually at the ends of phrases where they do this. It's almost as if the drum gets a little bit improvisatory.
Yeah. I can see that for sure with the drum work.
Yeah.
And
of course, it's just a beatbox. So obviously, all of it is planned. But either way, I can imagine someone sitting there at the keyboard.
See, it's not all. I mean, yes, it's planned to a point, but you can create a beat by improvisation.
Of course.
And so, I mean, part of it could have been improvisational initially, like them just messing with the beat, seeing where it went, and then laying it down after the fact.
But then again, that falls into the argument that, I mean, really all composition was improvisation at some point. But something tells me that after you go through the motions and are sitting there putting all these notes in the right place at a computer, at some point you had to have decided on something.
Right. Well, I mean, but they could have been using a beat machine to build a beat, too. And that, that kind of an input device would give you more improvisation freedom than inputting the specific notes into a computer.
Well, theoretically. I mean, assuming you have presets or something like that. But, this is kind of splitting hairs. Either way, the outcome was fairly successful. Would we agree?
No, I'm going to go and say it was pretty damn good.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was
This was a nice
successful.
little highlight for the early part of the album for me.
Well, I'm going to bring one thing back, though. I did feel that this track ran a little bit long.
And that was the repetition of the A section.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a shame, because that almost goes against what I said before when I said every single time the A section comes back, it's just as intense as it was in the beginning, but maybe that's the problem, is that it was merely just as intense.
Not more intense.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where I feel like it maybe could have benefited from some creative post-layering. Which usually is a cliche in it itself. Hey, just tack on more stuff, as we return to it several different times. But this time it actually probably could have used that. Instead, it kept itself somewhat interesting by being arranged in different ways each time. But even so, you still can see right through it. It's clearly just A, treated differently.
A in C's clothing.
Yes.
Or something.
Yeah,
No,
that's not bad.
That's not a bad...
yeah, sure.
But going forward, we get our next featured artist song, Becoming Harmonious, featuring Metal Mother.
Metal Mother.
Which is another duality song.
So this song was actually one of my favorite songs on the record, and
Mine too.
The big reason for me, though, might be different from Steve, just by guessing. The reason this is one of my favorite tracks is because of the industrial post-rock route it takes. I mean, I'm a big fan of industrial rock. I listened to a lot of it in the 2000s, along the same lines as Disturbed and all of that. There were the bands like Nine Inch Nails and Orgy and some other bands that were between nu metal and industrial that I really dug, and this had that kind of a sense. It was, in this track, the solid chorus, the industrial post-rock sound really made it feel like something that was mid-2000s that I would have really loved.
So my view would be different just by you guessing, right? Not the conversation we had before the podcast at all.
Correct.
Of course not.
It's not. It's based on theories, not fact.
Of course. Well, I think one of the reasons... First, let me just tackle this intro. The beatbox with muted reverb. It's sort of akin to a dark, unforgiving city. The kind of introspectiveness that you get out of movies like Underworld or Sin City.
which came out in the mid to late 2000s and featured those industrial bands I just mentioned. So we like it for the same reasons.
But you're not seeing through my sarcasm at all.
No, not at all.
Well, that was a lot of sarcasm, because the intro I thought was actually pretty cliche, at least in terms of,
no.
alright, yeah, we're gonna get dark now. I almost got more out of the Evanescence-esque track than I did this, until a certain point. I ate my foot the second the verses started, because they actually broke free from the joke, and they shut me right up. This tone really does take a genuinely dark turn, mostly driven by the melodies, which felt almost Sigur Rós inspired, which, you know, that goes back to, like, post-rock. The kinds of, the melodies, and part of this had to do with the fact that it has a very feminine, airy reverb to the vocals, even though the lead singer of Sigur Rós is male, but many were fooled. And then the melodies also were interesting for their brevity. They were very short, just these short little phrases that almost felt incomplete at times, which I thought really fit the mood of this track splendidly.
I just loved it for the fact that we got a sweet, soft, soulful trip-hop song.
Oh, you simpleton!
No, with fusion of industrial music on top of it, flowing in and out of it. That's what I saw here.
I'm going back and forth on this industrial thing.
That's because it actually flows in and out. It's not throughout.
It doesn't
the whole
stay
song.
consistently industrial.
Yeah, you're right.
It starts, and the core of it, the heartbeat of the song, is a trip hop idea. Is a fusion of that softer hip hop side with electronica, and as many have put it, until you can't recognize either. But it's soft, it's sweet, and everything is added to it. So yes, you do get that harsher edge of high reverb, industrial, deep, scary, all that sort of stuff, but it's softened by that original introduction throughout the whole song, and that keeps getting revisited in different ways throughout.
No, that's right. It's retrospectively, I think the intro took a different turn on me. It's the kind of thing that led me to believe it was going to be something a lot more cliche than it actually turned into. And then when they returned to it, it actually fit quite well.
And, I mean, that's also supported by the solid chorus work, too, in this song. I mean, the chorus work was very strong, and that's a very big part to Metal Mother's contribution.
There's several reasons why I love this chorus work. I mean, not only with the resonance of the voice itself, but as I said, those really short melodies. There's this simple chord progression going on underneath, but it actually packs quite a powerful punch. It's just sort of this minor 1, major 3, major 7/7 chord, and then a major 4. And specifically on that 7/7 chord, there's this moment where her vocals at the end of this short phrase holds the seventh of the 1 chord, right? And it holds that note which anticipates the 7/7 chord that follows, which seems like coming from the 3, I think, is what really packed this so powerfully for me. It's this just moment in that melody that really, I think, is the soul of this song, and in many ways is the soul of the album, because I was kind of straining to find another moment throughout that really hit me in the same way on a trance album, you know.
I agree with that moment. That was one of the most startling parts of the entire album as well. It was something that was... It's so unexpected and works so well that it's hard to see...
It is unexpected because of the fact that, again, coming from trance, I'm not expecting mind-blowing melodies. I'm really not. Especially not pointed, mind-blowing melodies of, such precision.
This is why this is one of my favorite tracks on the album. It just, that moment alone solidified the love I had for the track to begin with. I enjoyed it as it were.
Oh, so we are in sync? That's not what you said before the podcast, man.
What?
Quit. Okay, you're going to go to different corners if you guys keep this up.
He started it.
We're
I don't
arguing
care.
over loving it for the, same...
I'm ending it.
Different
Shush.
reasons? I don't know.
I don't care.
But yeah,
You're both
so
pretty.
I mean, I really think that this song really was well knitted together, and that what you thought was that cliche moment, I do agree, Steve, is probably what made it so strong in the end.
And
is because when it was restated, it fit so well.
Yeah, it's such that when it returned to, the interludes here and there, I think that was really echoing the intro. And it's funny because it was a separator in my mind. I didn't interpret it the same way. I'm sure it was the same thing, but it was downright beautiful.
We can now move on to track 5.
I have one more little thing to lead us in to track 5.
Oh.
The outro.
Oh.
The outro. Amazing. Really, really amazing. Another one of those moments that separates it completely from trance. the keyboard steps in.
Oh,
and
that's right.
This was more of like a 70s Billy Preston-esque kind of keyboard. Really interesting, very light, very delicate. And then the synth melody steps in there, but it's really not pervasive. The keyboard is really what tapers this song off and leads us into the very next track, Can't Kill Us.
Yeah. And Can't Kill Us is a track that, I mean, ultimately on the broad spectrum, it had some of my favorite beat work on the whole album. I mean, the drum and the bass really were tight and really great. But it wasn't very well held together by the rest of the song. There was a very bare sound that surrounded the beat work, and I'm speaking on a general sense for this track. But, you know, it left me wanting. That said, though, the way the kind of guitar work and the beat work sauntered is what really drives the song, and I think is what managed to keep me engaged through the whole song.
Well,
it wasn't just the sauntering percussion, it was the melancholy I heard in the guitar. It was that kind of mournful feeling that they were presenting in the punctuation of the synth guitar that I think really did a lot for the barer parts of the track. But when they started getting complicated, you're getting great percussion bass level. I didn't like what was on top of it, though. Well, not that I didn't like it. I didn't really fixate on what was on top of it. I was trying to reach for the lower end of the spectrum, which was hard.
I have very similar problems. The only thing is, I feel like even that is a secondary problem, considering that this is another track that sort of took an odd turn. In this case, not so much in like a satisfying direction. It started out. I am going to give this album some credit in terms of that it probably does have a little more genre variety than I originally expected, because the intro here was sort of that of a southern rock feel. It was very kind of gritty, you know, maybe less metal this time, but attacking that fake guitar sound in sort of a different way. But it fell away so fast. It's what I got from about maybe the first 20 seconds of this track. And then once it dissipated, it sort of went back to traditional trance, kind of like what we had earlier. We do have a few of those interesting things, like what you mentioned, the sauntering drums, but even that is only at one section. It's more later, like in the B section, where the high end was just, it wasn't offering me any melody. It felt rambly, you know, nothing that I could really remember later. Not like the previous track, which is why I was holding that track so high, is because that is a memorable melody. Not just for the fact that it's brief, but just for the fact that it packs a punch with the chords beneath it. This, I have a feeling, was not really moving through so many chordal changes. It was just kind of straightforward.
I think that was because it was trying the electric synth guitar, whatever, was trying to replicate both the melody and as a stand-in for vocal work, and wasn't doing either well enough to cement one of those two roles.
That could have been it.
And that it made it, like you said, rambly, and that was mostly in those B sections.
Actually, there's another moment in the song where there's a problem with the exact opposite. I think maybe there are times where the chords move a little too rapidly. Sometimes that's the problem, when the chords are too rapid that you don't quite distinguish any particular thing. It makes each chord change a little less impactful. With the second everything shifts and the tone is supposed to shift, you sort of just take it as another movement of this track that never really seemed to have much of a goal to begin with. I mean, that was the problem. The second it sort of dropped that southern rock feel. Not that I was necessarily engaged at it, but it was at least different. It was at least something different, and they went back to something very familiar.
Well,
not
yeah.
just for the album, but for the genre itself.
Well, yeah, and it lacked a cohesion. It very, very much felt rambly and just kind of meandering. It didn't really have a goal for where it was going, and that was apparent pretty much from the middle to the end. You know, and how it resolves itself too is very much just kind of like, isn't this the track where it just kind of falls apart at the end? It kind of just stops.
There is a second phrase in the higher register melody, that trance melody, generic trance melody, I might as well just call it at this point, where it sort of starts to rise and get very, very high, but then that itself is the end of the melody. It's almost the only moment in this track where I felt like it was about to go somewhere, or sort of take the melody to the next logical place, or to the new section, whatever. But it just kind of ends, and then it falls back into this sort of stutter. But the stutter actually keeps it in a loop, and that's in the drum work itself. It sort of keeps it in this loop that still you not quite sure where it is. I guess some people might actually say, you know what, just enjoy it. Just sit back and enjoy the ride. But a lot of times with music like this, you need something to anchor to.
Yeah, and we're not so much ride enjoyers either. You know. I mean, it depends on the track, but most of the time we need...
No, it does depend, I think. But it's about what you're going for. I mean, on the dance floor, maybe this would be more in the line of an improvised feel, and in it, as close as you get to improvisation for an entire track, you know, where you just let loose and do no specific dance step, that is.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not really buying it.
I like it when you play devil's advocate, though. Secretly.
Moving on
I'll never admit that again.
Our next even-numbered track, this time featuring Aya Volkman again. It's called I Need My Memory Back. This one, from the get-go, from the minute the intro starts, has this very tropey pop techno feel. It was very catchy, but very predictable. That said, I was humming along, I was tapping along. Even though I could predict every upturn, every shift, I still enjoyed it.
I think one of those reasons also is because of genre shift. Again, subtle genre shift. This was a little more techno than it was trance. In other words, the complexity really lived up to it. It didn't feel like it was filtered through, you know, a trance envelope. It was legit techno, and techno does tend to be a little bit more technical. Go figure. But, you know, that's the kind of stuff that I talked about this on several occasions. The kind of stuff that I used to listen to in these various shops that existed on the Bowery, which seems to just... They're record stores, but they only sell techno. It's all they do. And, you know, some of it is very slow and repetitive, but then within that, there's this strange technicality to it, where the drum work gets very bizarre in certain places. Some of it repeats, but then it has these segments of just burgeoning forth. And this felt like it borrowed straight from that tradition.
Yeah, you can definitely get a sense of that. I mean, in the construction, too, of the song. Just the way they combine the beats with the rhythm. The chorus was very, very, you know, very much a standard chorus.
No. Was not a standard chorus. I think the vocals were actually pretty top-notch. And I saw something neither of you really talked about, and that I felt it was definitely doing a little bit of a throwback to early Daft Punk.
The second you pointed it out, I agree.
Early funky Daft Punk.
I agree.
I didn't mention it, but I noticed it. And I mean standard chorus by what you'd expect from a standard techno-pop chorus.
No.
Yeah.
I thought it was better.
No, but
standard.
I'm saying trope-wise. It's still better. It hit all those beats that you expect from a pop techno song. It did. Whether you thought it was better than those songs or not is irrelevant. It still hit those tropey
I'm a
beats.
little with John on this. I think the second it made a Daft Punk turn is what made this most unique. And go figure, it's the same exact reason for every other point in this album where I've noted that the track, that it was being unique, that it was separating itself from the framework of the album. And it's usually when they choose a melodic instrument, a melodic line that is different from that same generic trance instrument, synthstrument, let's just call it, that I've been describing thus far. For this, it almost sounded like a flute. It was like kind of a muffled flute, obviously an electronic flute, but it was something different. That's not like what we've had so far, and that's what made it sound sort of Daft Punky, because they frequented that instrument. It sounded like at any moment they were about to break out with their signature vocalization.
Okay, so then not standard, but definitely a familiar Daft Punk sound.
Yes, we'll say familiar.
It's familiar.
Definitely familiar.
For
but
Daft Punk, yeah.
I just couldn't use that word. That's why I was arguing it. And I know that...
Maybe it's because that's why Daft Punk got popular.
Yeah.
You know, Daft Punk got popular because they were different. They used different instruments, different sounds. So, yeah, I can kind of defend this on the fact that maybe they're copying Daft Punk, but that's their benefit.
And
they're at least paying homage to...
While it was really familiar in the builds, the rebuilds, the breakdowns, that doesn't mean they weren't really very well done. I think that a lot of thought went into a lot of this, especially into the build layering, the re-energizing. yeah, you knew exactly how it was going to happen and when it was going to happen, but still the tone choices, the shifts that they were putting in there were just, for me, just doing a great job.
I've already rescinded what I said. Standard was the wrong choice of words, but it was familiar to me, and that was because it sounded like Daft Punk.
No, but I'm expanding upon that. I think that familiar is great in this case, because I think they took something familiar and did it exceptionally well. It's an exceptional, familiar piece.
You know what? It's the same principle as before, with you and the evanescent-sounding stuff. Yes. I think it's nostalgia. If it's nostalgia towards something you enjoyed, then that's positive in the end.
Yeah.
So this is gonna... And you know what? I'm gonna actually be a little more bold and say this is somewhat broader, because most people will not argue that Daft Punk kind of holds the torch for reason of being a more stand-outish electronica group. But yet... how many trance bands do you know? How many trance groups do you know? You know, DJ Tiesto. This is one that I know just by virtue of chance, but not because I'm actually remembering any of those melodies. So, yeah, they paid homage to the right person. I want to talk about something separate now, and that is the whole B section here, which I think you were starting to touch upon, John.
Yeah.
Where it starts getting a little crazier. In terms of form, it's a little bit harder to put together at this point. And you threw out the word prog at some point.
Yes.
And I understand in principle why.
Yes, and that is the way... And prog is a word I want to use for a couple of songs coming up, not just this one. But it's still not the most appropriate word. They take the idea of prog and strip it down to just the idea of let's be expansive in our music and then revisit things. They do this. They do it extremely well, but it still doesn't have the same oomph that you would get from prog metal or prog rock or anything like that.
Right, well, I think I have some justification for that. I think I have a lens through which to view this. It may not be prog in the traditional sense, because, yeah, prog really takes a few measures of this thing, they move on to a few measures of that thing, it just seems to endlessly expand until they finally finish doing what they're doing, and then they eventually return to their chorus. Well, this is not too far off, because I started to see this track here as sort of a ternary form, an A-B-A. The A is the sort of Daft Punky feel that we got before, and then this B is really where I would most liken it to prog. I would liken these shifts to be so subtly dramatic that they're not so connected to the previous. They carry one thing over, like they'll carry the beat over, they'll carry a few things, but then they always change up the next instrument. So in this slowly expansive way, yeah, you do get a little bit of a prog sensation. But I think I see it as more of an improvisation at the end. Kind of similar to what I was saying in the previous track, but here maybe a little more so. I feel like this whole B section, in a way, could be considered what I would love to call something like stuff. No, this is actually a reference. There was a band I saw called Rat Dog, which was an offshoot from the Grateful Dead with a couple of surviving members back at the Beacon Theater a couple years back. My roommate took me to it. And they had this little tradition that whenever they did a concert, whenever they reached, the 10th, 11th, 12th song, each one of them, of course, being much longer because it's a concert and they get to expand, and they're a jam band, so boy, do they expand. They got to this moment where it's just about as free as you could possibly expect for a jam band. And I got the release of this concert that was actually recorded straight from the soundbox, straight from the mixing board. They recorded a CD, and it's the live concert, and these are labeled. And when they got to this point, I wondered what the hell they were going to label it, and they actually call it stuff. It's a tradition they hold. Every single concert, they have this moment. And in this particular case, it was two drummers. It was the guy who was already a drummer, who I think was Jay Lane, also a former drummer for Primus, and a secondary drummer, who is sort of a drummer on the side, but he just stands next to the other guy, and they just start drumming together. And it's this totally improvisational moment, which is why they just label it stuff, because it gives them total freedom. And I feel like this moment here was sort of that moment. Somewhat less so, admittedly, but comparatively to the album, yeah, this is that moment.
And I think that was because while it is less so, it's still adhering to a very familiar form. You know when they're going to start jamming out. You don't know exactly how they're going to state something, but you know that right here you're going to get a nice culmination.
Mm-hmm.
Right here you're going to get the next step of the build. You just don't know how they're doing it, how they're approaching it.
Yeah, form-wise, this was definitely the most interesting part of the album. And then the last thing I have to say about this track here is also one of my favorite moments in this album. So far, they're actually building.
The outro?
Oh, the outro. There's this electronic hum, kind of like white noise, that sort of ends this track. It sort of just tapers everything off again. I thought that was probably when they're at their most sonically experimental, is when they start taking these, again, these darker tones. One band came to mind, TV on the Radio, the kind of electronic work that comes out of that band, at least.
I see that.
That would be specifically the work of David Siddick, who is the primary sound engineer and co-founding member of that band, which is what gave them their whole tone. Even though they fall under alt, they're still very, very electronic-oriented, and he has a very unique sound, and this is the only time I've actually heard anything similar to it, is here, in this track. Combine that with another element, which is the same Billy Preston-esque keyboarding that we got earlier on this album.
A little bit jazzier.
Yeah, fuse those two things together, and I think this is when I was head over heels for this outro. Even if not head over heels for every element of this song, I think this was, again, back to the emotional core.
It was extremely pretty. I knew you were going to like that. First time I heard it, I knew you were going to like that. Because it was that, we're talking freeform, it was the most freeform part of the whole album.
Yeah,
it was
really
the most spiritually out there part.
Agreed.
And then...
we get
my favorite song, and I'll argue this to the end of time.
Oh boy.
Sky Toucher.
Sky Toucher, one word, is a Street Fighter-esque intro song.
I kind of want to drop the esque.
Okay.
You could literally have thrown this on any SNES fighting game and not lost a beat.
So yeah, it sounds very much like you're playing Street Fighter. It's got that kind of sound bite melody mix. But I mean, for me, as someone who grew up on that, it instantly hit the nostalgia points again, and kind of drew me in. It very much felt like two fighters. It had this kind of pumped up nature to it that kind of drew you in and got you grooving.
I think it was a more creative fusion of the techno and the trance. I mean, granted, it's still kind of cliche in the end, which is why I groaned when we start this to sort of throw back to Street Fighter. But hey, whatever. It's separate from the album. It's separate from the earlier stuff on this album, which was very trance-heavy, and we throw in a little bit of this techno here, and they kind of had a good thing going, fueled by also a melody that was a lot more playful.
And hey, if you mix trance and techno, you get trance or techno.
I really can't argue that.
That
logic.
hurts my feelings a little bit.
Alright, no, he kind of schooled you there.
The reason I love this song, and it's not the best song on the album, that's the whole thing. It's my favorite.
Because
of the sheer variety of the percussion in this song. The speed, the style is completely mutable, is just off the wall, continuously changing. I did not even pay attention to the higher registers. I couldn't. I didn't want to. I didn't need to. It was the deep tones, and like I said before, it's something I love about trance and techno. It was those deep, rumbly drums and bass work that's going on there that is it's so much fun for me.
But I
love what was going on.
I argue that's not indicative of trance, because trance doesn't tend to focus on the bass too much, unless it's just a very steady wub-wub. But beyond that, I'm not really seeing much more in most. Alright, yeah, alright.
Techno dubstep.
Alright. There is a heavier bass in this separate section.
I
and
love
yes,
what they do with that.
That was interesting.
And because of the variety of what's going on here, it really, to me, showcased all the things that they do with their synth drums. And I loved every little bit of it.
Yeah, you're right. I will give this two major points. The first is that percussion. It gets very developmental later on. Even if it is just the percussion that's developing. That's
another part where I want to, but can't use the word prog.
Yeah, no, I'll go for it, because it's just like in earlier moments. The percussion is really the most experimental here. And then the other big thing is that melody. Even if it is just sort of the same generic trance instrument, it's I don't know. It's playful here.
Yeah, there's something about that
this
playful melody that really draws you in. It just it
this
was
track
very
in particular.
Yeah, it's very engaging.
There's a lot of slides I noticed, a little glissandi here and there, where it just sort of like bends upward, bends downward. It kind of quivers in little moments. It was interesting for that reason. Something to take away.
Yes, definitely. But it was still very digestible, too. I think that's what's really the key of this song, is even though it had all of these things and it was very interesting, it was accessible and digestible
Maybe
as well.
it's digestible only because it's familiar. I mean,
It
there
was
probably
because,
aren't
well,
too many people who wouldn't recall, listening to this music at least, that wouldn't recall the SNES era of side-scrolling fighting games, and it's just, it takes you back.
If they were 8 years old.
Well, okay, fair enough.
Well,
but
it's.
an 8-year-old isn't the first person I would recommend this album to.
That's true.
It was the melody itself, because it was so light and airy and out of the way. I think that's what kept the familiarity, because it's familiar. It for me, it was able to become the actual backdrop for the song.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Which also gave it a very positive tone in the end. I mean, there's that victory feel that that's just...
Okay, they didn't do the Final Fantasy fanfare, but you almost expected it.
No, they didn't. But it definitely gets you pumped. It keeps you excited to play the game. Honestly, I feel like they should just submit this to some sort of retro game developer.
I wouldn't be surprised if they have.
There you go.
It doesn't have to be retro. I know a few that would do the same exact thing nowadays.
That's true. That'd be odd, though. Fly By Night Only, featuring Yaros.
Yeah.
AA. Interesting.
Would you say... What nationality would you even say that is with AA?
I wouldn't dare try
to figure
honestly.
it out.
Well, considering the individuals go by the handles of Beretu, Edit with a capital IT at the end, and Ua.
Are the names of the band members?
That's their handles. I would assume that Yaros is a handle
as
in
well.
this case.
Okay. Well,
Interesting.
so Fly By Night Only is... I mean, the first standout thing you really get about this track is the beautiful kind of melodic tone that it's going for.
Even though it's fast.
It's very fast. I think the speed is one of the reasons why the first thing that leapt out to me is sort of an Asian-influenced, maybe a J-pop-influenced style. I'm not saying that, with all my heart, but a little... I kind of almost expected this to fall in some kind of anime.
We were actually going back and forth trying to describe what part of the Asian visual and audio media it's part of. Or at times I was thinking, well, Chow Yun-fat should be in this, or maybe Jackie Chan, or maybe Evangelion. I couldn't pin it down. It was all these little aspects of media.
It felt a little kawaii, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it was a little kawaii, but for me, the issue I did have issue with it, and that was it really just had a very classical electronic progression that in this case I didn't feel did it any good.
No, yeah, I feel like this is kind of a low point for the end. I mean, granted, again, you're introduced to a backdrop that is a little bit of a... I feel like they have this tendency to dip into other genres, but they never really go full force. And I know this sounds very ironic, considering last week's discussion about an album that we were kind of half criticizing for jumping around. Well, sometimes we were glorifying it, but of course we had a big argument over it. Here I feel like there's less of an argument. This band tends to dip their toes into various genres, but in the end it all falls under trance, which still means I guess they kind of know who they are, but it's tough at times to sort of give this album a soul of its own. It almost is the same problem that I had, at least, with last week's.
Yeah, but it did feel more natural when it jumped around, I felt like, this week. You kind of expected it to.
That's only because trance is the kind of thing that you can't escape from. It's in trance, front to back, really.
Yeah, but isn't that... but that's what we're listening to here, is trance, so I suppose there's got to be some forgiveness for it.
Trance is only a single element involved here. I mean, in this song in particular, it still had a lot of the glitch elements with scratching, the skipping, and the use in the vocals. There's still things going on here. This is
I think I just
dance.
wanted a...
EDM and trance are not as synonymous as you're using them.
Alright, that's fair. But maybe that's simply by virtue of I don't know as much.
Yeah.
I know a little bit more trance than I do EDM. EDM is something that is a word that almost evades
Definition for you?
Yeah, a little bit. Electronic dance music. I mean, most dance music these days is electronic, so the definition is a little odd for me, I guess. But I felt like this album, at least at this stage, maybe the dip over into Asian-sounding stuff sort of pushed me in that direction. I feel like maybe this band sort of needed a trance personality, if that makes sense. Sure, they're in trance, and that's not a bad thing. I think that they do good with it. I mean, granted, I was more invested in more of the darker sounding tones from the beginning, but that's neither here nor there. If there was more of a personality behind the rest of it, I would be more invested at this stage.
Okay.
No, well, I'm not done with this, because this is going to bleed straight into the next track, where I have almost the same exact problems with, if even more so.
Well, yeah, for me, the next track, I mean, I have even bigger problems with, mostly because...
Carry the Sun.
Yeah, so Carry the Sun, I mean, starts with this very, almost cliche-sounding hero theme that carries the first, 40 seconds or so.
The house tribal-esque beat work that's thrown into it as the starting point. Now, here's the thing. We're getting away
Describe
from...
me, house. Can you do this?
More tribal than trance. EDM, okay.
All
Brief
right.
history lesson. EDM encompasses everything that is house music, club music, trance, techno, a few other minor ones like dubstep. Well, not minor, but dubstep, hardcore, and a few more that are escaping me right now. It's any sort of music that you're meant to dance to. So while you've been seeing a lot of trance, there are a couple of songs here that you just can't say trance with. And this is one of them. This is house more than trance. This is because of that dum 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 dum. It's kind of familiar with what you would expect, like System or Disturbed, like we were talking about before.
That actually makes perfect sense, considering this track. Alright, which actually, almost inspires me to take away my previous comment, because then really this is doing the exact same thing. I thought it was doing less. I took this track initially to be more of a generic trance, but actually now that you've pointed that out, that is a significant difference. That says that this track is yet another
personification of EDM.
Yeah, personification, more of the core trance dipping its toes into another related genre.
Yes. Now, the biggest, it still does less, though. The problem is, this song still does less.
So that's I'm not imagining this.
No, it samples from the previous 8 tracks. Blatantly.
That's what I had initially thought.
No, it's not just because, okay, track by track, we can say they do have distinct features. The distinct features of Carry the Sun have already been presented to us.
Yeah.
Like the harpsichord. I was kind of upset that harpsichord piano was back. The original beat work and higher register that was in Mind of the Beast. I mean, this is not unique in any way. This is a sampling of the previous track.
This song is a regurgitation, and the biggest problem with it is it's not the last track. I'm glad we got the last track because it's gorgeous, but this song would have served a stronger purpose if it was the final track, because at least it would be a conclusion, almost a summary.
But it would have been a poor
disagree
summary.
with that, because that would have been... It's insanely weak. I mean, alright, I see what your point is here, and...
I'm not saying I would have been satisfied with that. I'm saying structurally it would have served a better purpose than being the second to last song. As the second to last song, I
actually feel like the penultimate... I'm going to defend it on that reason alone. The penultimate track, if you're going to have an album of this style, where you have all these dipping toes into various things, but you do have a core essence, as it were, then you state it early in the album, as they did, and then I think the place to do that is the penultimate, not the final. Not the final track. The final track is where you leave your audience on something that is a little bit more original, more unique, which the final track certainly is.
So
I'm not defending this track, because it's still
it's stale.
My issue is that I think the core essence of this album is weak. Which means that structurally, them placing this here is correct, but it's still weak. Because if it wasn't really that engaging in the beginning, it's really not that engaging here. I'm just saying that structurally, they were doing the best with what they had.
Right.
With the written material, this was actually I don't have any issue with track placement.
Okay. It's such a minor point, because the track still is weak. period, regardless of structure.
This is my devil's advocate.
Yeah. But moving on to the final track of the album, Beauty of the Unhidden Heart. Now, first of all, because I've been actually trying to focus more on the emotionality of title naming as well, because I feel like you can say a lot from a title. Not that every track always fits its title, but this one certainly did.
That is a really nice title.
It's beautiful.
Beauty of the Unhidden Heart.
The idea of
alliteration in there?
Well, and also the idea of wearing your heart on your sleeve, your unhidden heart. This is my heart for the world to see, and it conveys that not only in the title but in the structure. This song is featuring Sister Crayon, another female vocalist, and I mean, from the moment it starts, it's heartfelt, it's passionate. You get this loving and longing feeling. It's even, once the beat kicks in, got this sensual vibe. It'd be impossible to talk about this song and not talk about this kind of sensual nature. I can easily see a grinding, swaying dance style to this song, because it gives way to that. And it's in this tribal kind of heartbeat kind of sound that it conveys.
I'd subtract the grinding.
Yes.
Okay, the swaying though, but close dancing, not grinding, but very close.
Yes.
Fluid body movement.
No, it's a slow dance.
Yeah.
It is in fact a slow dance, and that comes across. The really unique aspect of this song is the once again a duality, which we haven't really visited in a while. The alternating words are so hard at times. The alternating between electronic and acoustic. It's
Actually,
not true acoustic.
No, it's not.
It's not true acoustic, but it is not
It's an
a computer
acoustic.
synth.
Yeah.
It's a much more true to the original source material type of a feel. And
It's
they
an
sound,
illusion in the end. It's still
Yeah.
an illusion. But no, I see what you're saying.
they're actually
I think-
going for realistic instruments, physical instrument sounds.
I believe in this particular case it was the harp.
The
I
harp?
think there was actually a sound there. I think it was
piano
Throughout.
was throughout, and
I think this harp was too.
guitar was throughout. Acoustic-ish guitar was throughout.
I could be mistaken, but I really heard this as a harp. Again, there's always some room for debate here, because this is a track that, because of all of the sounds that they use are electronic at their core, there's always going to be a little bit of flexibility where they can add a little more high end and just kind of take away from what the true timbre of these actual acoustic instruments are. But that's the tone that I got, and it made it all the more beautiful, because who doesn't love a harp?
And it's that alteration and the reimagining I found in the electronic sections, that where they bleed from one to the next and really turn it digital, but don't lose that forlorn sensual essence in the actual instruments.
No, this was much
that
more of an
keeps
expert
it.
blend.
Right, and that expert blend is finally crafted with the female vocalist too. She adds a humanity to it that really blends these sounds together and really gives you this sense of longing. It feels very heartfelt.
You just hit the nail on the head in terms of what I'm lacking in the rest of this album: humanity.
Yeah.
I think that is the core element that I'm taking issue with. There are literally 2 tracks on this album where I have that humanity, and that is here and earlier on.
Becoming Harmonious.
Becoming Harmonious, exactly.
And I mean, but what John had pointed out to me actually is emotionally on this track, it felt very heartfelt and passionate until the female vocalist kicked in. Then you got this sense of love and longing too. It's not just love and being in love, but also this longing. Being apart is tough as well, and you get a sense of that distance too.
Even when she auto-tunes.
Yeah, even
Which
when she
is,
auto-tunes.
like, that's difficult to pull off.
Right, but that auto-tune is also a perfect blend of that humanity and technology too. It really blends and bleeds it together, that auto-tuning of the voice.
And that's something I actually
yeah.
really enjoy about this band. I love how they just take 2 ideas or 3 ideas and try to make it work. Regardless of whether it will work or not. They at least are attempting fusions throughout this whole album.
You know, they're attempting fusions, but the funny thing, I feel like they're doing it in such a subtle, careful, safe way that I couldn't even come close to calling this album experimental.
No,
I would never say that.
Me neither. It's way too safe for that. There are too many safe
It feels
moments.
like these are almost the kinds of things that come naturally when you're trying to make trance more interesting.
I would say, though, between the outros and intros on some of the tracks, the moments in some of the tracks, and then this final track, like last week's album, I'd be really interested to see what their next album is going to be. This is only their sophomore album, and they do some really interesting stuff on here. So I think they're still finding their perfect niche, and I think it'd be interesting to see where it goes from here.
They do. They got rhythm, and they got the power to reach out when they want to. And I will also play devil's advocate with myself for saying that I don't think the emotional core is really what's most important here. I think the dance music is what's most important, and some of those tracks that I thought were forgettable, maybe it's okay that they are, because we had this discussion back not too long ago, episode 89, with Pharrell Williams' album. His album was dance music at its core, and that's really what it boils down to in the end, is can you dance to it? Will it keep you engaged on the dance floor? And probably this will even keep you a little more engaged maybe than some of that stuff on Pharrell Williams' album, but it's just that he offered a little more, and he wasn't confined to the niche of any particular niche other than his own. Here, this still does seem to be a little confined. I guess I'm doing the outro. I'm in my wrap-up at this point.
You sure?
I've kind of already done it, in a way. I think this album is actually very similar to Beck's album back in 84, episode 84 in this regard, Morning Phase. I recall the issue with that album was that the opening track, Morning, was utterly gorgeous and led me to believe I was going to get awash with feels for the rest of the album. Now, granted, this didn't happen quite so the same. It started off very cliche, but I find at the end of the game, the end of the Beck album, the end of this album, that there's one, maybe two tracks that really give me the same level of feels. The rest just struggles. It struggles to have a place. I'm not being anti-trance or anti-dance, but even that region, even that area, that genre needs to have a soul at some point. That's, I think, the challenge that they're faced with. So, yeah, I gotta give it kind of similar to Beck. Maybe I rated Beck's a little higher because of the overall presentation of otherwise good tracks. I need to give this around the realm of 3.25.
So a little bit above average, but not much.
Yeah.
I just want to say it's a personal victory for me as a human that I got Steve to say not once but twice feels unironically.
You know, when you have guests called Head Over Feels, you kind of have to embrace. Literally embrace.
Yeah, well,
because,
especially considering how popular they've become, they're kind of leading the way as far as pop culture goes. So, yeah, I mean, Steve kind of hit for me. Me and Steve were kind of on the same page with this record mostly. I think I might have enjoyed it more than him, but as far as presentation and composition and construction, I hit a lot of similar points with Steve. The only reason it rates higher for me is pure nostalgia. The two tracks that really were harder on Steve musically, I was willing to ignore blissfully because I was just like, yeah. Like, I really grooved with it. And it's a base primal level, but honestly and truthfully, we've rated on that before. I mean, we've admitted to our ratings being influenced by pure enjoyment as well. And if we can really get something out of a record, I mean, at the core, that's a big part of it too. You know, at least for my rating system, for sure. I mean, emotionally, there wasn't a ton on this record. You know, there were moments of it, pockets of it, but the truest, strongest, most emotional song was the final track. And I loved it. I mean, that's a song that I will listen to over and over again. I've already added it to a playlist. So, you know, that one had impact. But I will agree with what Steve said about last week's band for this band, is this album makes me intrigued for what they'll do next. The great parts were enough peppered throughout the record that shows me they have a talent for this music and a talent for possibly even doing more. So I think that's where my rating lies. The negatives are, though, is ultimately I don't listen to a lot of trance, I don't listen to a lot of dance music, and it's because I don't dance as much as I used to. I mean, truthfully, the last time I actually danced on a dance floor was when Steve was with me, when we went to see the 24-hour musicals at the after party. That's the last time I danced, which wasn't that long ago, but before that, who knows?
I've already said that I'm more prone to dancing to funk than anything else.
Yes. So, but that said, I mean, I like dance music, and I can dance to pop music and trance music and all different kinds of music. I mean, honestly...
I'll interject, though. I do like to feel pumped. And actually, probably being from Staten Island, you know what? It kind of does leave me... When I do hear that fist pump, granted, I'm going to snicker, on the outset because of how cliche it is. But, you know what? It does have a pumping feeling to it. It has that quality.
Barney Stinson would put this on his Get Psyched mix.
Oh, he would.
For sure.
It's all rising.
It is all rising.
All rise.
Until the end. But, so that said, I think that my rating is a little higher than Steve's, but not by much. I give it a 3.5, even. I like it, but there was just not enough complexity or diversity by the end, except for the final track, to really get it higher than that for me.
I give it momentary technicality, but I don't give it soul.
Yeah, and that's just the thing. From an emotional perspective, the soul was lacking. It was kind of hollow.
Yeah.
But 3.5, I mean, which is still respectable, and I do enjoy it. I will definitely listen to this album again because I did enjoy it.
I enjoyed 9 out of 10 songs immensely.
Jeez.
Immensely enjoyed. But it's more like sweet candy. You know it's kind of bad for you, but you still gotta, have another Snickers or Starburst or what have you.
I likened it to hard candy.
Yeah.
Why?
That too.
That's mean.
I don't know where the problem is.
But there is one?
But there is a problem. And I think it's the adherence to synthesized instruments.
That's ironic.
The lack of infusion of a more natural tone in a lot of spots, because Beauty of the Unhidden Heart proves that it can be done magically. Fusing the technical and the human together and making something very beautiful. Still, it's actually one of the most varied techno, trance, EDM, whatever you want to call it, dance music albums I've heard in a very long time. The songs really do have distinct sounds for the most part. I can pick them out on a second or third listen what song is which, just by hearing the opening beats or hearing a snippet from the center of the song. They don't blend together, and that's something that is a big issue with electric music.
It's also such a vast genre, though, that, I feel like that would be conjecture partially on our part.
I find a lot of...
There's got to be more out there.
I find a lot of the mainstream bands and DJs tend to just make one sound and then futz with it over the course of an album.
Yeah, well, actually, that is part of the bad part of what I remember about those Bowery places.
Yeah. The other issue is this is not an album, per se. This is a great presentation of what this band can do when they delve into other ideas. This is, I got this sort of an idea, I got that sort of an idea, I got this sort of, I got that.
It was lacking in the theme department.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
But it's not cohesive with any major arc or theme other than it's EDM.
That's the soul I described.
Yeah. Soul and theme are almost synonymous in this
without
case.
realizing that you're using the word soul is the same thing as what I just said.
I do argue, though, that it had the arc. That's based on my track placement from before.
Yeah,
I do believe it had the arc.
But theme, it was definitely lacking.
It says what it is, then it steps away from it. It comes back once more time to say what it is near the end, and then finally it says, "But we are more" at the very end. Very strong on arc, actually.
Yeah.
But I would like a combination of great theme in. But then you start going to other ideas, other problems. Like, look at Daft Punk's album for Tron Legacy. Great theme, great arc, but the songs lose some of the cohesion when you take them out of the actual album because they were meant to be placed together so specifically. So, I mean, you got multiple problems and sort of an idea when you're talking electronica. Anyway, wrapping up. This song, I love this album because it's so much enjoyment for me, but it doesn't have all the technical chops it needs to really bring it up. Still, it's a 3.75. It's a really great album for me. I don't expect 5-star from electronica. I would love to hear it, but I don't expect it. Maybe that's just conceited for me. So me saying 3.75 really does rate this very high for a purely electronic album.
So we'll be averaging a 3.5.
Yeah, and I mean, it's average on the simplistic scale, too. I mean, it's worth listening to. I mean, if you're a diehard trance fan, you probably want to buy it, but overall, for the general public, definitely listen to it. You'd enjoy dancing to it.
It's those little things, though, with like the industrial, the rock, the kind of delving into prog, that's on top of the techno and the glitch and everything.
Yeah, but
they
subtle.
have so many ideas. They just didn't do
Right.
one or two.
That's why I think it's for the average listener is just worth listening to, because they'd miss those subtleties.
I'm satisfied with our commutative rating. Yeah, I think it boils down to that
being a little bit above average.
Subtle often is just not enough. I think that they needed to go full force in a few of those areas.
Do it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Be bold.
And moving right along, I've been listening to a lot of hip-hop lately, name-dropping lots of local and not-so-local rappers. And we haven't really talked on the podcast a lot lately about what new music we've been listening to, other than, obviously, the new album we listen to every single week. And I had an interesting experience over the last week or two. Everyone knows the Wikipedia theory. It has different names, but the idea that if you search an article on Wikipedia and you click just links to get to other articles, eventually you'll get to math or Kevin Bacon.
No, it's specifically if you click the first link in the main body of text every single time, eventually you'll get to math.
And so this idea that you
Inevitably.
can this idea that you can click on all these links in Wikipedia and find other fascinating things linked to that link and to the link before, and so on. Well, I've had the same experience, thanks to Schaefer the Dark Lord and hip-hop. Listening to his latest record, Sick Passenger, one of his final tracks is called Intervention, I believe is the name of the track. And it's essentially exactly how it sounds, a rap intervention, where it's from the perspective of Schaefer and like 5 or 6 rappers intervening. Cool Z, Dr. Awkward, Adam Warrock, MC Frontalot, Jesse Dangerously. Some of these rappers I knew already. Some of them I didn't. So I clicked through, because on Spotify, when it has the featured, it links those rappers. So I clicked on Dr. Awkward, who has quite a number of albums. His newest one, Blank Pages, I'd never heard. I know he did a song with Schaefer the Dark Lord on that record. So I listened to that track first and fell head over heels for it. Listened to that. Then through that, I noticed that I don't know if it was him or a different rapper did a song with Kabuto the Python, so I clicked through to that, which led me to another rapper named Beefy, who just released a 6-song EP that's Netflix-themed that I just downloaded, that you should go buy on his Bandcamp, and so on and so forth. And so I went down the rabbit hole so far just on hip-hop, and I'm sure I can do it with other artists too. And it was kind of it was very interesting and really awesome, because I found these other bands who had new records out, or new-ish records, that I really liked.
One might say you discovered the internet.
Yeah, pretty much. It's that idea that you can jump through on the internet, but through Spotify.
I would hate to see who your guide is.
But it was cool to discover all these bands just by clicking from one link to another, not having to go anywhere else except in Spotify. There was one thing outside of all of this hip-hop, though, that I did discover this week as well. Jack White has a new solo record coming out just under his name, Jack White, and the new single and title track of the album, which I'm not remembering now, is on Spotify, which I listened to and was great. It was 4 minutes of awesome, which you would expect from Jack White. So I'm probably going to pick that album when it comes out. I'm calling it now. No one can argue it's on the air. I'm doing that record.
Not disputing you.
So that's been the two big musical things for me. And it was interesting to kind of correlate it to this thing on Spotify I hadn't thought to do until this week.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, you are describing the facets of the internet.
The rabbit hole, yeah.
Yeah, I had one of those too recently.
It's a this actually is very close to something that I've described before. In case this is not clear, Our topic of today is about how we discover new music. And obviously the internet is going to be a major component of this because it really is the new eye-opener. Before this, it was really a lot more bent on happenstance and who you know or the kinds of record stores you were attending. The internet age, and this takes us way back to episode 1 when we were discussing technology and its effect on the music industry. And it's a wonder I remember that. But it really is... It comes down to that discussion, where as much as you want to, maybe bash certain little elements of technology here and then, it is a massive eye-opener. For once, you have the power. You have the power. It is in your hands. Control is yours.
But actually, no.
There's still some happenstance there, because, for instance, you didn't necessarily plan exactly which link was going to lead you to the next, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, but you did have some amount of control over it.
Actually, I was... One of my favorite guys on YouTube, and I've been spending way too much time on YouTube the last few months, is Markiplier. I love him. He is hysterical. I've seen so many different other genres. I love him because he does all these random video game reviews and playthroughs and all this stuff, and he's hysterical. But I saw that he liked a post where he was featured as YouTubers reacting to baby metal. And we came across baby metal. Baby metal is the most interesting thing I've learned in the last month.
Baby, as a side note, baby metal is the
name
of a band.
Yes.
You're getting there.
Baby metal is 3 under 16. I think they're 12, 14, and 14, or 13, 13, and 15. Like, they're that age range. Japanese girls who play J-pop melodic death metal.
See, that's going all the way. Remember we were discussing about that Asian-inspired track
I
today?
went deep here. This is... I can't understand what they're saying, but it's ridiculous because they sing J-pop. They have that vocal work. But on stage and in their videos, and they're wearing, like, the Kiss schoolgirl uniform. And they're doing the gyrations, but they have spikes coming out of their wrists and elbows and knees. They are... terrifying and hysterical at the same time.
You're all about the show, aren't you?
No,
I'm just remembering your experience.
It's coupled with the tone, the tonal fluctuation between, like, real, honest-to-goodness pop music, followed with the guttural on top of it and blended in just such interesting ways.
Is that a boar?
It was a boar.
Sounded like it.
And, or, we'll say... Simmons breathing in a little too deeply. I mean, he's got to have bad lungs by now, yelling all the time. It's such a weird fusion because it is still both pop and metal, and not only that, but death metal and J-pop, and it actually works. Like, scarily, it works.
And this was through another internet.
This was just clicking on buttons on YouTube.
Well, because YouTube will suggest what to click on.
No. It was me going on and watching a video game guy, and he ended up doing a video about baby metal.
Ah.
I mean, I still think in the end it does come down to you have to have a certain predisposition to click on a certain thing, depending upon what you're already on.
Well, yes, and also, but part of it is like how you discover music. You said before that now you're in control, whereas before it was community and where you go and who you know. Because of Facebook, because of Spotify, it's still where you go and who you know, but not without leaving the seat. It's still like I mean, a ton of my music recommendations come from Facebook. In fact, one of the recommendations that's on the Facebook page for Crash Chords is actually something called Mouth Sounds, which is created, I can't remember it's Neil something, I can't remember Neil's last name, but he is the guy who did Powder Puppet Pals, he's in the band Lemon Demon. He has a new mashup album where he takes all existing works, it's all stuff that he didn't make, but mashes it together to make it its own unique sound. And it was really interesting and really cool, and it was recommended by Mary, a former writer for the website, posted it on my wall on Facebook, and I thought it was worth sharing on the Facebook page, and that's who I know.
Neil Cicerega. Cicerega.
And and that's because of the community I'm in. They recommend stuff. I like it. I share it around.
Yeah, well, obviously it started with community was your own group, group of friends, and that was your community. And I still think I'm a little more traditional in that sense, that it will still probably mean a little more to me in the end if I receive a band recommendation, from a friend or from... That's where I've gotten a huge amount of my music. But it's true that based off of that, because... most of those bands, in my formative years, from anywhere from middle school to present, partially ending with college, because that's the last time you're really in a group of a large span of people who know people who know people who know people. It's almost, college is kind of like the internet of the world, in a way, of a small group.
Well, yeah, when your future career is that too. It's usually, if it's a good job, it's a community as well.
True. I rarely know people so lucky with their jobs. But then again, yeah, it does depend. There are jobs out there like that. But the funny thing is that since those have such a profound effect on your performative years, they almost teach you what to look for later on. So even though those bands may have come from personal contacts, then when you take the next step and go forth toward the internet, then a lot of times you are looking for things that are related. And in my experience, I've said this countless times, and it's definitely relevant here, my experience with the artist Sufjan Stevens, and how his group, he had so many people who worked for him in the past. I never even read much about him as soon as I got into him, but I got into him based on friends in college and whatnot. So I was listening to his music back then, but I didn't really know much about him, about the artist. Since then, I've researched. Since then, I've looked up his entourage, as it were. And also, I found myself at various concerts by people who I never even knew were related to him. But then once I realized that Sufjan Stevens is a really, really good place to discover new bands, for me at least. Because it seems that people who've worked with him on projects in the past go on to have very, very interesting careers.
Especially when you told us the story of how you found St. Vincent.
Yes, that was true with St. Vincent. It's also true with the band My Brightest Diamond.
Right, who I know through you.
Shower Warden, who is a brilliant composer. To look at her history is an exploration into a bunch of different genres.
Yeah.
Genres that, in some extent, I would argue that she invented.
And that's quite bold.
That furiously unique.
And also, actually, going back to community, too, community just besides friends, the hip-hop community has always been very tight-knit, and this idea that, well, you do my record, and then I'll show up on your record, is rampant on these artists that I've been listening to, and the circularity is really great, because it is a great way to discover new acts.
We ran into this just on the podcast here. Back in episode 52, we reviewed Queens of the Stone Age, Like Clockwork, and then... just by chance, because we also happen to know a little history of Arctic Monkeys, so later in episode 66, we did their album, Arctic Monkeys AM. And turns out the lead singer of Queens of the Stone Age was featured on the Arctic Monkeys album, and the lead singer of the Arctic Monkeys album was on the Queens of the Stone Age album.
Yeah.
That's actually why I ended up, in the long run, getting and choosing the Arctic Monkeys. Because I remembered him from
Oh, was
Queens.
it really?
Yeah,
I didn't even know that.
That's why it was on my radar.
Yeah, see, this would have been the kind of, accidental, for me, it was like the accidental recall, but...
Sure.
I was like, oh,
and also,
still around.
Honestly, another way I've really grasped new bands is still the good old-fashioned way. Good old live shows. I wouldn't have known about Handjob Academy at all if it weren't for the Wall Street Players and getting to see them perform.
Well, that's it. My Brightest Diamond, actually, it was really a live show where I heard of her initially,
yeah.
And from there it jumped off to St.
And
Vincent.
our now good friend, Louis Logic, I know him through Schaefer and Adam Warrock. He performed at a show with them, and
you
it was
did an
great.
article on several of these people who you're all following now as a result of just one person initially.
Yeah, and it's really amazing how a live show can really solidify that too.
Who are all the names? Mark Cahill.
So it's Michael Kill,
right?
Louis Logic, Tribe One, Adam Warrock, and Schaefer the Dark Lord were at that specific show. And also it featured Christy B, who sings Boys with Schaefer the Dark Lord, who has a forthcoming album that hopefully when she comes back to New York, she will come on the show.
That lineup sounds like the Super Friends.
And
there's some pretty awesome names coming out of that.
But it honestly felt like it too, because there was never a moment in anyone's act where they were alone the entire set. Because they've all worked together, at some point someone else joined someone on the stage. Like, Tribe One was the first one on, and Adam Warrock joined him. Michael Kill, when he performed, Tribe One joined him. MC Frontalot, who was a guest there, sang with Louis Logic and Adam Warrock on his Adam Warrock song Salieri.
That's another important thing, considering that MC Frontalot is very well established within this community. A lot of times when more established musicians within your group, within your genre, sort of give you the go-ahead as a musician, that's very, very important for putting you in the limelight, following in the footsteps closely behind them, because then anyone who already is following them will now suddenly start to follow you.
It's actually how we discovered past and future guest Hops as well. He opened for Schaefer at his album release party, even before that.
This happens in the rap community a lot. Ice-T, anyone he gives the go-ahead to is made.
Well, G-Unit is the perfect example of that.
Sure.
I mean, they all had their own solo careers, but they were still part of one big piece,
and
interestingly,
interestingly,
just jump in and out.
Interestingly, with Ice-T, anyone who he disses also is ruined. Like Soulja Boy. I haven't heard much of Soulja Boy.
I won't say that. But big guy, Dr. Dre, when the Doc does an album for you,
back then, sure.
If he does a song on your album, you're going to be a made man for a while.
Well, that's why people. I mean, no disrespect to Snoop Dogg or Eminem. But they were known also because they're singing with Dr. Dre.
Because
he
Dre
was a
is
huge
making
push
the
for
beats,
them.
man.
Yeah, he was a huge push for them. And I enjoy that community, and I think that's why I jump so deep into rap. Also because I find with the branches of nerdcore rap especially, is a lot of them are singing more about themes that I can relate to. I mean, Dr. Awkward has a song called Find You Well, and it's all about him singing 3 different stories about terrible things that happened to him. But still, at the end of that verse, the chorus is he still hopes the song finds them well. You know, kind of turning the other cheek. And that's something I can relate to.
See, Dr. Awkward, that's a great name for a super friend right there.
Even the name is awkward.
Oh, I should tell you then that there's on his album, Blank Pages, he does a song with Schaefer the Dark Lord called Now Hiring. Dr. Awkward sings from the perspective of a hero trying to hire a new supervillain arch nemesis on Craigslist. And then Schaefer sings as that villain responding.
Oh, that is... I'll
have to share that with you.
That might be meta. Right there.
I do want to jump off into something else here. And
sure.
Do that thing I do. Play devil's advocate.
No.
Gotta do it.
No.
Because as good as
I lied
this
before
can
when
be,
I said I like it.
As good as this can be, this community and whatnot, that go-ahead that an artist sort of gives to the next up-and-coming artist, a lot of times that isn't as desired. You know, for many artists, it's welcomed. It's, wow, you put me in the play. Even considering the story we heard at length last week with Louis Logic, certainly it can be very much desired. And if you can consider that an act of serendipity if that's put you in a good place as an artist. But there are times where you are in some ways pigeonholed as a result of certain artists who, you know, they give you the go-ahead. All of a sudden now you're following in the footsteps of someone who you may never have intended to really follow through. It can be a great way to get into the music community, but a lot of times, you know, that's just not the goal. The goal of music is individualism, not always community. You shouldn't never out the introvert.
Well, but
which so many musicians are.
Yeah, well, the unique thing about a lot of this community also is that it's important when you're featured on another track to still keep your unique voice. And that's the important thing. And I think that's why artists like...
Most moguls will recognize that and identify it and give you your freedom, but sometimes it ruins it for the fans, because if you expect too much, as a fan, if you expect too much as, oh, no, he's following right in the footsteps of so-and-so, who I'm really, really into, then all of a sudden your fans now have a preconception of what you are to be. Rather than if you were just to do it up independently, then you are garnering a fan base that is purely yours and your kind.
But I think it's still your fan base. I think that's more of a problem for someone who has an image issue to begin with. I mean, take for example Miley Cyrus. She started as Hannah Montana. Well, actually, she started as the daughter of Billy Ray Cyrus, which is an image on its own. Achy Breaky Heart had a huge reach. He never recovered from that, really. He had albums, but that was what he was known for. Then she was Hannah Montana. She was a huge TV star, huge TV career and songs, and then didn't want to be that identity anymore. She'd been featured in so many different places in Hannah Montana, but didn't want to be that person anymore.
Right, but I reject the notion that it's based purely on there being image issues to begin with. I mean, you could totally know who you are, but a lot of times that jolt into the limelight is really what will affect, that next step. That's the crucial moment, whether fans jump on what you're doing or whether they don't.
But what I'm trying to say is it's more personal than the fans' interaction.
No. A perfect example that actually speaks to kind of both sides. The dissolution of the 1990s boy bands. That's what we're going to call that event when everybody started falling apart. Name someone other than Justin Timberlake who was in a boy band from that era.
I can name like 4, but that's just because I'm a music
and was successful. They all had solo careers. NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, all the groups that were forming at that time. And those were the 2 big ones. But there was a lot of little ones.
No, that's true. I would say J.C. Chasez, whatever his name was, the other lead on NSYNC, was the only one who's somewhat memorable, and he flunked out after his first album.
Yeah,
solo
because
album.
they were already they got pigeonholed into a very specific role. I'm the sensitive one. I'm the introspective one. I'm the sexy one. Like, they got stuck like that. That was something that was really played up for their images. They were supposed to represent different personifications of sexuality.
Yeah, sometimes the drive to escape being typecast is not necessarily defined by you as an artist and your decisions. Sometimes it's just defined by the powers that be.
Well, that's typecasting.
They decided to put their cards into Justin Timberlake, not the other guy.
Well, no, it's not just that. How do you make an album trying to do boy band if you're only known as the sensitive one and you are now just stuck by yourself?
Well, the difference is also Justin Timberlake has shown, even from his very first solo record, that he has skills beyond singing and writing.
If I'm not mistaken,
sure, and I'm not.
And that's what it really comes down
to. At all,
because pigeonholing,
we're not talking about the ones that made it. We're talking about the ones that didn't.
But pigeonholing is parts a self-fulfilling prophecy, but part also how much you put into it. I mean, if you're not a capable musician
he worked his
and
butt
you
off.
fall out, that's it. Yeah, Justin Timberlake worked his ass off to earn that respect and reputation. So did Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre started as just a rapper, but then busted his ass to become one of the most well-known and successful producers of our time.
Sure, but I mean, the example that you cited with the other NSYNC guy, I can't even remember his name.
J.C. Sasha.
There you are. But see, this is the kind of thing where, all right, we have that example, but you inevitably won't find any examples because if you didn't hear about them, you didn't hear about them.
Yeah.
I'm proposing that there is a whole slew of stories out there to back up what I'm saying that inevitably will never have the power of being examples to begin with because they never made it anywhere. In other words, you can say those stories about Justin Timberlake because he worked his butt off, but theoretically, on the other side of the coin, you could work your butt off because the music industry is such a unforgiving place sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Then you can work your butt off and just simply not be recognized because the money doesn't seem to be in you.
Well,
to producers.
That actually speaks to the big fallacy we get with these now, for the most part, dying off talent shows, where you got these people who really do have the ability to sing other people's songs.
Yeah.
They really do have the ability to just sing. And they really do have the ability to be marketed for one album. And even then, a lot of the winners, their albums don't really do it. A lot of the runners-up do have better careers because they were different enough that they got kicked off the show. That's the other big thing I hate about those shows. The person who wins every year sounds the same.
Well,
the runners-up, the ones that stick it into like the final 5 and lose, tend to be the ones with distinct voices.
And we talked about this when we brought up our reality TV discussion.
But they get pitched. That's the.
I guess I get that.
I think it's because they want a
feature.
TV. I think in some extent their songs are also chosen for them. They want TV-friendly music, TV-friendly images. In other words, a track that will appeal to the widest audience possible. For instance, I do remember, I can't believe I remember this, but you know what, it's no wonder I remember this. 3rd season, American Idol. I believe it was the 3rd season. third place. No, actually, I think she the winner? She might very well have been the winner. This was a very odd example where Fantasia Barrino.
Yes.
Familiar?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was she the winner?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. That year, I think so.
She had. I don't think this was one of her primary performances, like her winning performance or anything. But she performed a rendition of George Gershwin's "Summertime," which real throwback. I mean, you talk going all the way back to the 20s, 30s. There, that's not something that's really common for modern audiences. But it was an amazing performance. So there was some personality in there. It wasn't just what you described: sing and regurgitate. There was definitely her own personality in that song choice. But, I don't know, it seems to have gone by the wayside now. People don't remember that performance.
I
remember it.
I think it's overgeneralization, but to John's point, I mean, there's so many of these shows now that they have to market it and cut it up, and that's why reality TV as a whole stinks anyway. But bringing it back to how we discover music, that's another thing that's kind of on the negative side of social media and modern TV, is some people discover music through that medium, which I think is trite crap, frankly.
No, but it is a big source for a huge portion of the population.
You know, and that's what led us to our pop music problem, I think, is it comes from that source. There's no radio anymore, really. I mean, there is, but nobody goes to radio specifically.
MTV killed the video star.
Except for NPR. Like, I've heard lots of great music on NPR, because between the musical interludes and when they actually have featured artists, you can get a lot of stuff from NPR.
I get better music from public radio than most of the stations.
That's what I just said. Yeah.
And
so,
they don't give you music. They just give you the facts about news and stuff like that.
But
I'm being facetious.
I think overall, though, I think to bring it back to this how we've discovered music thing is that how we find music has changed a lot over the years. But like, it's very interesting to still take a moment every now and then, and I think we'll do this on the podcast every so often. Kind of take a moment to realize, well, how did we discover this stuff? Where did it come from? Why did we find it? Is there a new way to find it?
It can help you plan your own personal progress as a expanding mind. And I think we should always be culturally expanded. I don't think that's the kind of thing you should ever just say, all right, yep, you're my go-to source for music, and that's it. You know, you need to know where you've gotten the best sources in the past, but also never stop the search. Never stop the search, because music changes, time changes, and people change too. Someone who you may have gone to for music years ago may not be the same person years later.
Stagnation is poison, always.
True.
I feel like eventually I'm gonna have a Hunter S. Thompson story of how I found music, where I'm on Barstow at the edge of the desert when the tunes begin to take hold, and it's gonna be something like stupidly crazy. I want to be on that journey. I want to get on that bus.
Yes, I'm sure
so bad
you
I want to get on that bus.
So I mean, I wanted to take a moment to look at that, because I think we really, and also as a purpose for our audience, all 5 of them, to have a different way to find their music too, by our suggested sources. And talk to your friends.
I simultaneously propose the alternative. I think independence is also good sometimes. Sometimes you need to get away from your sources and take the bull by its horns yourself.
Well, I mean,
the internet does, I think, give you that power to a certain extent. And the same applies to what I was saying before about aspiring musicians who want to put out their own ideas. Sometimes, for career purposes, it can be good to be recognized by an older, more experienced person, but sometimes you need to go at it alone in order to be a little more individualistic about your stuff. You just need to step away sometimes from society. Do a whole Walden kind of thing.
But at the same time, nobody becomes popular, and gets their own, concerts and everything like that right off the back. It's the guy that opened for that one big band that was awesome at that time.
Yeah, that's true.
That's who you remember.
That is the vast majority.
That's how used to, and to some extent still do. That's how people blow up.
Yeah.
Because they opened for the Doors, or the Mamas and the Papas, or whoever was actually popular at the time. The Temptations, the Four Seasons, or Elvis Presley. I mean, that guy that was there beforehand, that warmed up the crowd. Yeah, well,
That's
1 or 2 or 3 people.
What I was talking to earlier with those live shows that I went to.
Yeah, they took him home. They were like, hey, you know what? That was pretty awesome. Who was that? And maybe before the internet, maybe now, but that's still one of the I find to be the best ways to discover someone new.
Because the live experience is personal for you too,
and it's always
That's true.
unusual. Like if it's someone you've never heard of, it's going to be unexpected.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. I think this is a great place to tie a knot in it and move on to our spam mail of the week before we wrap up for the day or night or whatever time of day you're listening to this.
Spam! Safest messages, or toasts, are usually launched at one point during the wedding, but are likely to just be hilarious, humorous, to unusual as nicely. Greatest man jokes.
Bye.
SZZEULBOEZXLK.
You should require prompting. You should say who it's by. We should recognize these fans.
He likes me to prompt him, I think.
Also, I didn't get it.
Will a repeat help?
No.
Safest messages.
No,
Anyway.
that might hurt.
Or toasts?
Or a toast.
I love that.
It's more about how you vocalize it than what's actually written, I'm sure.
No, it's still not English.
Oh, that might have been the nicest thing he's ever said about me.
Probably. And you have it recorded for posterity. You can play it back for yourself over and over again. I haven't done this in a while, so I do want to direct people. We do have a Facebook page. Please like us. We have a Twitter. The handle changed recently. It's now Crash Chords Web. Each word capitalized. No spaces or underscores. Also, donate button on the website. We're constantly growing and trying to improve for you guys, and we'd love to have more guests or even travel to meet artists or improve recording quality. All of that helps from your donations and support, since you guys listen to us, and we're thankful for that. We have email addresses on the website. You can find them on the About Us page. Individuals as well as a group admin email. Feel free to send us suggestions, questions, comments. We do have a record that was suggested by a coworker of mine that we will hopefully get to in the coming weeks and review as well. So please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you do hear someone on our show, not just the albums we're reviewing, but the guests we've had, like Lewis, like Hobbs, like Nelson, find them. If you thought they were funny, if you thought they were interesting, head over Fields. Go like their pages. Get in touch with them. Check out what they do, because we're trying to build a community, like we were just talking about. We're trying to build a community here of music plus. Music plus entertainment, music plus social connotation, music plus artists, music plus entertainers, music plus. That's what we're doing here. So there is a plus.
Yeah.
These people we're having on the show, these bands that we're bringing you, these topics that we're bringing you, we want you to be aware of and, like them as much as we do.
We'd like to be an aid for the guests and musicians that we feature, as well as an aid to our fans to expand their own sense of...
Even if you're looking for a music recommendation, we post on Twitter daily. Just check us out. See what we're listening to. Ask us what we're listening to via email or comments as well.
And that leads us back to what I was saying in the topic. Finding music. Finding music and how we find it. I wasn't just pushing independence for the hell of it. I had something. My next album for next week is something that I got fairly independently. Basically by just looking at who was out. I kind of just scoured modern musicians, because, a lot of times you find, I have a tendency to find bands that, they just broke up 2 years ago. Dang. But their music is so great. Case in point, As Tall as Lions,
right.
Who I discovered right at the moment that they were breaking up, and I had to go back and sort of love them for what they were. In either case, I was trying to find something modern and interesting without doing that wiki-hopping thing. I basically just looked at the master list of everything that is being released here, and I just started to kind of skim gradually. And I came across Arc Iris. Very interesting of what I've heard so far, but for the most part, kind of in the realm of indie, but kind of in the realm of alternative, and they like to dip into very, very interesting instrumentations. At one point on this album, you're going to get cello, and you're going to get a lot of it.
So you've already heard it?
No, I just skimmed.
Oh, skimmed. Okay,
Really
and what's
skimmed.
the album called?
Arc Iris. It's
By?
self-titled.
Oh, it's self-titled. Okay, the band and the album are Arc
Yes,
Iris.
if I'm not mistaken, this is their debut.
Okay, well,
A band of fairly young musicians and seemingly ambitious ones.
awesome. Well, we're excited to hear it. So we'll see you guys next week. And remember, as always, music is life, and life is good.